Welcome back to Walk With TFB. Tim Bryson here, and as y'all know, I'm a Black millennial who's eager to have unfiltered conversation with authentic people centered on international education, global sport, and Black culture. Man, it's been a minute. It's been a minute since we had our last conversation with Catherine Thompson, but had to run the podcast back for another, not only timely conversation, but an important moment, not just for academia, not just for practice, but quite honestly, the future of global sport and international education. I'm here today joined with Dr. Javier Wallace, who is going to share more about his story in a second. Without further ado, Dr. Wallace, man, welcome to Walk with TFB.
I appreciate it, Tim. Thank you for having me. Glad to be here on the platform with you. Love the work that you're doing in the space, the movement that you're building. As you well know, no need for me to tell you, we know that sport is extremely global. We know here in the U.S. that we're having way more international students be in the space. And so it's important that we, as professionals that are working with the sport or even spectators or fans of the sport, understand those experiences. So glad to see what it is you're building and the impact that you're having with the different communities that we're all a part of with sport.
I appreciate it, bro. And I can't, we will not go further without first acknowledging. I think we first connected back, shit, had to be 22, 21 or 22. Remember, I took a call in Columbus, it was a Staff's Cafe in Columbus. And I remember like, you got to talk to Dr. Javier, you got to talk to him. And so glad to see this conversation circle back in a recorded manner because, again, we got something to celebrate here shortly. But before we get to that point, Doc, what's your story? Who are you?
Oh wow, who am I? Dr. Javier Wallace. I always will start off and will never not say it. From Austin, Texas, born and raised in the city of Austin, from to a Black Panamanian father and a Black American mother. I say that because it's who I am and it has impacted all the work that I do. And so I'm a scholar, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm also a former college athlete, played football at Florida A&M University and HBCU in Tallahassee, Florida, in a more recent, especially in the space, a published author. And so wrote a book about basketball trafficking, human trafficking, high school basketball. The name of the book is Basketball Trafficking, Stolen Black Panamanian Dreams, published on Duke University's Press. And the official release date is November 11th, 2025. But in addition to that, I'm just a normal person. I'm a postdoc at Duke University, so I teach classes at the university. I'm a historian. I have what we would call the largest tour experience focused on Black culture in the city of Austin, Black Austin tours. And that's been real cool to do that work and talk about our stories, our histories, and contributions in different aspects of society. So I'm a multifaceted person, definitely here representing all those aspects of my identity, and more specifically on the sport and race piece and how it intersects with human trafficking in high school basketball. But I think I'm a regular person.
No, I love that. I love that. We're gonna dive into a couple things that I think are pretty important to highlight and pronounce. First and foremost, I actually was born on Florida A&M's campus, so I'm glad we share the Rattler lineage for
You were
sure.
born on campus?
I was born on campus, bro. I was born in Leon County,
Oh,
Tallahassee.
okay, okay.
Parents
Yeah,
with
shout
my
out.
parents with the fam.
Oh, I didn't know that. Okay,
Yeah,
shout out.
but number two, you were born and raised in Austin, Texas.
That's right.
Played football at fam.
That's right.
You skipped a lot of HBCUs along the way. How did fam get you?
Oh, that's a good question. Man, oddly enough, I only wanted to go to HBCU. I grew up in Austin, and we were going to the State Fair Classic. Grambling played PV. We went to the Bayou Classic, I think once or twice. Southern played Grambling down there. I knew people that went to Prairie View A&M, and I actually graduated from high school in 3 years. I didn't stay all 4 years. I only wanted to be in high school for 3 years, and I played varsity one time and I made all district and everything that first year of varsity football. And my coach, I knew I wanted to go to college. And my coach I came into his office and he was telling me, he said, you can go to college for free if you want to play football. And that was all I needed to hear because my parents didn't have money to pay for me to go to school, but I knew I wanted to go to school. And so he said, I tell you what, you just bring me a list of the schools that you want to go to. And at that time, this is early 2000s, 2000. I graduated 2005, but 2004, we were still making tapes on VHS. And so I went to the dollar store and bought a whole stack of VHS tapes. And so we went to the VHS. I took the VHS to his office, and we dubbed all of the games onto VHS tapes. And we sent them out to all the schools on my list, and they were only HBCUs. I wasn't considering anywhere else. Now, some people advised me that I was like making the worst decision in my life. Since I had made the decision to leave early, they were convincing me to stay, and then they're like, "Wow, like you should go try to go big." I'm like, "No, I want to go to a black college because I had come up in the culture." And then fam, you don't even know. Fam, it was just a big program, really. And then I came to the office one day and he was like, "Come here, sit down." And he walks over to his voice machine, voicemail recorder, what do you call it? We don't even
Yeah,
have those
yeah,
things
yeah,
anymore.
yeah.
And he pushes the button and he was like, "Dude, hey coach, how you doing? Calling about Javier Wallace from Hampton University. Dude, hey coach, how you doing? This is Coach from Grambling State University calling about Javier Wallace. Dude, hey coach, how you doing? This is blah 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 from Florida A&M University calling about Javier Wallace." And he's like, "You see what I told you?" I was like, "I guess you're right." And so from then, I just decided to take. I took the official visits the furthest away from home,
Mm.
and that's just the fact. That's a fact. And Tallahassee was 15 hours away from Austin, so I went to Tallahassee. And if I'm being the honest as I can be, why I skipped over all of those other HBCUs, um, what I told myself was they had the best party when we went out on the official visit. That's what I told myself. What I told my parents was when we looked at attendance for NCAA FCS college football, D1 AA at that time, they had the highest attendance for
Hmm.
people attending. So we were going to be playing in front of big crowds and the school. At that time they were still promoting that they were Princeton College of the Year, number
Hmm.
one. So they're like, "This you're going to come into a good environment." But fam, I just had a great time on the official visit. I was like, I can do this, and that's why I went. That's exactly why I
Hey, I
went.
don't blame you. I do not blame you. I do not blame you. Glad to have you represent FAMU, bro.
Yeah.
Before we get to segment two, talking about your book, you went to FAM, obviously, played football there, stayed at FAM, got your master's in sport management there, but then took some time off before I'm sure at some point you said, it's time to go back and get this doctorate. What went into the decision to go back to get that doctorate? It's about 6 years later.
Man, what went into my decision to get my doctorate 6 years later? I just had to have a come to. I had to come to reality. I moved to Panama, where my father is from, just off the strength of wanting to have that experience for myself. Because I grew up hearing about Panama from my uncles and my aunts, many of them who lived in Austin, and their friends and cousins. I just wanted my own experience. And so, since I tried to first apply to the PhD program at UT Austin, I didn't get in because my GRE scores were trash. Absolutely, I decided to spend 6 months in Panama just studying for the GRE and getting to know more about myself and that side of my family. And when I got to Panama, I was overtaken, man, by everything that I was experiencing. It was new. I was learning new language. I mean, everything was just new to me, and I was enjoying every bit of it. And so that 6 months turned into 6 years of me like just living and making life in Panama. And I'm glad that I did that because what I've acquired, and it even brings me here to this day to talk about the book and all the things that I do were based on those 6 years. And so ultimately, um, I am 28 years old, living in Panama. I am the athletic director at an international school, the most prestigious international school in the country. I've reached a pinnacle in sport administration at that school. Also, from the financial piece of like you couldn't make more unless you go into entrepreneurialism. And at that point, I realized if I wanted to ascend further, I would probably have to go work in the government. And I was like, I'm not working in the government at all. That's not going to happen. And so I just had to reconsider what I was doing. And a good friend of mine who works at Duke, he also was at UT Austin, Dr. Martin Smith. He works on race and sport. He moved to Panama for 3 months, and we were living together. And he was just like telling me all these different things about what I should do, like things I should consider. And he told me to go to the Black Student Athlete Summit. And he told me go to the Black Student Athlete Summit and start talking in Spanish. That's all he says. They go start up there talking in Spanish. And then I went up there, I started speaking in Spanish about what I have learned about myself. And I mean, people rushed the stage. And I had an offer from a guy who had a university in Mexico. They were looking for athletic director. And then my soon to be academic advisor, Dr. Lewis Harrison, he came up and stopped the conversation and he said he can't take that job. He's coming here to study at UT Austin. I was like, oh, I didn't know that. But since you telling me, cool, I'll sign up, I'll come. And so it took me 6 years because I was living life, learning more about myself. I now had something to think about, and then just speaking on the stage, somebody said, "Well, you're coming to do this thing here," and that's how I started to get back to the PhD.
This is good stuff. This is good stuff. Segment two, we're gonna transition to your book. The title of your book, as you mentioned earlier, is Basketball Trafficking: Stolen Black Panamanian Dreams. Talk to
Yes.
us. Why this book?
Uh,
Why now? I know there's a story tied to it, and again, we'll get into that as well. But it could have happened at any point in time, and it's happening right now. Why is it happening right now?
It's happening right now, primarily because everything I mentioned about my background, living in Panama, working in sport. I met a kid. I met his mother at a basketball tournament I was organizing at the school, and she was carrying a packet around raising funds for her child to go to the United States to play in this basketball tournament. He was on the national team, but it was a non-official basketball tournament that the Panamanian state would not pay for him to attend. They need to have their own resources. And so I was seeing everything. He's from the same part of the country where my family is from, a very black part of Panama, Colon, on the Atlantic coast. And I wanted to support, and I told my dad, who came to the US to play sport in the 1970s, and he was just like, I want to pay it forward. And so he paid for the kid to come to the States to go to this basketball tournament. And he ends up being seen. He gets an offer to get a scholarship to go to a school in the US. And from that point, we're all excited. I'm actually coming to Texas at the same time. I'm accepted to the PhD program. So we're leaving Panama together. And it just goes completely south when the kid gets there. And so it just transpires in what becomes basketball trafficking, which I knew nothing about. But since this kid is now in the US, they kick him out. He's living with me and my family. And I'm learning more about this thing that we're in. And knowing he's not the only one, it becomes important as I'm doing a PhD to think about how can I use what's at my fingertips to understand. And I'm just writing about this. And so now, a couple years removed from the program, I just never stopped researching, never stopped being in contact with this young person, never stopped being in contact with other people. And so now, the moment the book is out, is because this is happening every day in sport, especially as the U.S. in the NCAA and basketball as it becomes more global. Every year we have more international players playing every sport, but specifically men's and women's basketball. The numbers from what we can tell are not going in the opposite direction. Now some things might happen that might influence that to happen soon, but as they currently stand, is a lot of students are coming from around the world to participate, and if not now, when? Like, when do we protect them? Like, when do we address the issues that are happening in basketball, in other sports that are not keeping these young people safe in these journeys that they want to embark upon that we need because we need their labor to fuel the systems that we are enjoying when we watch them in the game. So we just need to make sure that it's safe. And now is the reason because the game is only becoming more international, if you will.
I'm glad we're having this conversation. 'Cause I think we're going to be able to book in, at least to an extent, some of the things I've talked about publicly, but what you're studying as well. And what I mean by that is many people who either follow Walk with TFB or just seeing, Tim Bryson's work. I primarily have focused on international college athlete career development, career pathways, which obviously we know is fucked up. The immigration system, again, go different conversation for another day. But they athletes get here one way or another. And to my whether it be ignorance to what is happening and what has happened, never thought of trafficking to be in the same sentence as sport.
Mm-hmm.
So for those who are listening now, like, yo, basketball trafficking, like, what is that? Like, what is that? How would you describe that?
Yeah, so my official definition of basketball trafficking is the unregulated migration of international students to participate in interscholastic or intercollegiate athletics in the U.S., primarily through the F1 student visa. Now, what is that? People might ask after that point.
This ought to be good. This
Um,
ought to be good, bro. I'm ready for this one. Go ahead.
it's simply human trafficking in U.S. sports. Um, and I stick talking about trafficking because usually when people hear the word trafficking, like you mentioned, sport is nowhere near one of the first images that appears in their minds. Usually when we think about trafficking, our mind is usually taking us to some level of like sexual exploitation and in a very gendered manner at that rate as well. However, even when we look at the official definitions of trafficking, which have been defined by different government entities around the world, what also is included in addition to sexual exploitation is labor exploitation. Like labor is a form of trafficking. And basketball or sport, especially in the way that we use it and its use, is a form of labor. It's something that can be used to coerce people, to force them to do things that they don't want to do, to set up false pretenses for them, right? When I say I'm going to bring you to the United States, I'm going to give you your own bedroom, I'm going to provide these things for you as you play for me in my school. But when you show up, you don't have any of those things. Like that is a form of coercion that can transfer into trafficking. And so it's important that we just know that trafficking is not only one thing. It's not just a gendered sexual exploitation. Trafficking can be labor. It can be the exploitation of labor, forcing people to do things against their will that fits the official definitions. So trafficking can take on many things in basketball, from the labor point all the way to like some of those more extreme instances where somebody might be feel like they're not feel like, but somebody is being taken advantage of, maybe forced to do something outside the realm of basketball that can lead into like a sexual exploitation. But placing quotas at games on how many points, as was the case, who the kid who was living with me or the young person, all right, a coach had a point quota over him. Like he was supposed to make 18 points a game, right? If he didn't make 18 points a game, right, there were consequences. And so like that also is, I don't care who the person is in basketball, you know, we can't just force somebody to say if you don't make 18 points a game, then I'm going to withhold this thing from you, because how can you guarantee that somebody's going to score 18 points a game at least?
This is good. I'm so glad we're having this conversation for a number of different reasons. One of which I'm not excited for, but I'm happy to get to do is that I get to coach in my dissertation. I need to go back and rewrite my literature review for sure. But I bring this up though because again, as I'm thinking about migration and sport labor migration, we've seen in recent years both the NFL and NBA create academies, particularly within the global South, right? And those have been celebrated, included by from people like myself, to be as a pathway, as a means to the NCAA model, obviously with the goal to be go pro in that sport.
100.
So, what indicators or even like distinguishing factors would you see and or have would name that distinguish between like sport labor migration and like recruitment by choice versus exploitative recruitment practices through sport trafficking?
Great question. And people often ask that question in the that question of choice as well, because some people will make the argument, even from the trafficking piece, is that these young people are making the decision to come to the United States. They are signing up for these things, right? They're not, and I think the biggest thing that we must challenge in that is similar to this question of trafficking, because our minds are not our minds, what we have been fed from the media. And there's some pretty good studies that talk about that about trafficking discourse, and how a lot of trafficking discourse and policies that fight or combat trafficking are based off of like Hollywood movies. And one movie in particular that has made a lot of people have oriented people's thinking and decisions around trafficking is a movie Taken, right? Taken, like I'm gonna find you, I'm gonna kill you, right? Everybody know that part, like everybody know that line.
Yep.
And from Taken, and so like our mind, because we don't, like there's no choice in that aspect with that when those young women are being sequestered and they're being forced
Hmm.
into something, right? And so that idea of choice doesn't exist for them in that way. But when we hear somebody that says, well, I'm coming to play basketball in the United States, I'm signing up, and maybe things didn't go the way that I want to, but you still decided to come, and so you should have some level of responsibility. Yes, I don't, not even yes and no, like, because when we talk about what trafficking is, like you're promising me something and I don't receive those things that you're promising, you have a responsibility to me. And so I did choose to come here, but under what pretenses did I decide to come here? And so that's one thing, just to help, better understand the conversation. Like when the question you pose is like, yes, these people are making the decisions And oftentimes, like, it's not like, again, what we would think of an extreme form of trafficking, but trafficking is, the definition is very broad and things fall into certain categories. And so from the perspective here in the United States, which makes it very unique, particularly with basketball and football, as you mentioned, in the U.S. educational system, that makes trafficking in sport look a little bit different from what we see in football or soccer trafficking. And how that plays itself out is a lot of what we see here is going through the educational system because of the U.S. education base system that we have with sport, right? It's like it's impossible for those sports that you're going to evade the U.S. education system. It's impossible.
Yep.
Whereas soccer, you can play in the
Yep.
Champions League without even graduating high school. Like
Yep.
nobody's going to stop you. But if you want to try to make it to the pinnacle of the NBA or in the NFL, you have to graduate from
Gotta
high
come.
school. You got to come deal with the NCAA at some point
Yep.
because this is the percentage wise, nobody has defeated the NCAA in producing draft picks for the NBA. Nobody. Even with like more like other people coming in from maybe like the French professional leagues or European professional leagues, the NCAA still has the most amount of draft picks coming out. So it's one of the best pipelines. You got to deal with it, and so things can be different here. Whereas in other sports, where you don't have to deal with the U.S. education system, things can take on different ways and manifestations.
It's good. We're gonna stay here for a second too, because you keep referring to the education system, and I'm glad you're saying system. I mean, I know that's deliberate language, but you also mentioned earlier, right? Unregulated migrations. I'm reading notes through the F1 visa, which is the
Yes,
immigration system. And so,
yes.
could you talk more about again the F1 visa being this policy or being this policy, both in a governance gap that is allowing trafficking to persist? What is it
Well,
about the F1 visa that coaches, agents, other actors are exploiting through the F1 visa that's allowing trafficking to continue to perpetuate and not only perpetuate but grow in different through different sports and in different markets?
yeah, great question. So the F1 student visa, as we do know, especially for people that are interested in the question of name, image, and likeness and labor rights for international students in the United States that are students and athletes, particularly like NIL, it's a very it's similar and it's different in so many ways. It's similar because the same way that athletes are locked out of true NIL opportunity access to opportunities like their American born counterparts are US citizens. I'll have to say that. I would like because there's people who are US citizens who are literally international,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because they didn't grow up here, but they have citizenship in the US. And so like just I don't well, let me not go down that rabbit hole.
Yes.
But leave that alone. Um, but what the same reason they can't work is similar to the same reason like this trafficking thing happened. Like this visa just doesn't work well with with the sports system. It just doesn't work well. So from on the trafficking side, what happens is we don't know at the high school level specifically who's coming here to participate in sport. Also, when you come here to participate in sport on the F1 student visa, there's no provisions that a school has to or a place has to make for housing, for food. Like it's understood that the person who accepts a F1 visa to come to the United States as a student, that they have all the financial resources that they need to survive in this place. But we know, but when you bring in somebody from any global north or global south, but in this case, maybe somebody from the global south who doesn't have the resources to sustain themselves outside of what the scholarship or the financial aid that the institution is providing, might find it difficult to provide for themselves. And they're at the mercies of whatever is being provided for them. And since there aren't any provisions listed in the visa, a school does not have to say a student can only stay with two people in a room. You have to have a host family. The host family has to be vetted. We need to see if we have to do a criminal background check. None of those exist. And so that opens the door for plenty things to happen. Also, on the education side, to maintain eligibility for your student visa, you have to have passing grades, right? You have to make sure you're not doing anything like working, which is a violation. But nowhere do we see any requirements that say you have to be performing athletically well, or you can't have your visa removed because of any athletic dissatisfaction that a coach might have with you. So what ends up happening, as it happened in the case of the kid that I write about in the book, and other young people that we've seen in the news, is because of athletic performance, students have had their visas revoked because on the basis of academic issues. Well, oh, they're failing classes. Oh, well, we can't give this scholarship to this person anymore. They're in violation of their visa. Where in fact it was a athletic issue that the coach had with the player, but there's no guardrails. There's no system. There's no regulation that dictates you cannot remove a player because of this, that, and the third. Even though it might not be academic, you can use academics to remove it. So the visa just doesn't have any rules, apparatuses. We don't know. And I'm pretty sure you come across this when thinking about international student athletes in the US. There's actually no way we don't even know how who they are from a application standpoint on the visa, because there's nowhere on a student visa where you have to indicate or an application that you are participating in any level of interscholastic or intercollegiate athletics. You don't have to reveal that information. That doesn't exist on the I-20 form. So we don't even know who's here for sport actually. And the visa just doesn't work well with this multi-billion-dollar system, in the way that player moves now. Right now, I work at Duke University. I'm around men's basketball players all the time, and it is so common for these young men to come into Duke having been at 3, 4 schools before they even come to Duke their freshman year, and this visa doesn't work good with that. Like, because we know we need to move a lot now to get the best opportunity, but you have to transfer your visa in a very specific way, lest you risk the chance of being out of status or violating the terms of your SEVIS number. And if that's not transferred correctly, you're going to be out of status. And so the visa just isn't good in its current state. And it can produce trafficking the same way that it can impede students from who are athletes from taking full advantage of NIL. I mean, they're all interconnected. It just doesn't
Absolutely.
work well. It doesn't work well.
It don't work well at all. And I think, we're talking about labor migration, talk about education system, talk about sports system, particularly the NCAA. But this conversation, right, and this work that you're leading and producing is not absent of race and the
Oh,
role of race and racism. So I would love for you to, take however long you need and or want to explain where anti-blackness, where racism, shows up and how it shows up across several of these systems, all of them, in what you've studied and what you're learning from individual stories as well.
100%. Great question. Not all nationalities are not equal. All passports are not equal.
It's good.
That
Mm.
might be hard for people to
Mm.
swallow, but all nationalities are not equal.
Yep.
And they're not. Um, Travel access to the world is not equal on somebody's nationality. It's just not. There are countries where you have more access to the world. You can travel freely. The visa processes are way easier, less complicated than other countries. There are some countries in the world where you literally can't go anywhere without a rigorous, intense application process for a visa to enter into. And just so happens how it might be accidental that the majority of the nations that are located in the global south have some of the strictest impositions on visas access to the global north. And maybe it's another accident. Let me not be play today. It's not an accident that many of these nations in the global south are nations that are full of black people and other people of color, that we hear in the rhetoric that we currently hear about anti-immigration are the populations of people that we want to keep out of places in the global north. And so race is extremely important to consider, is because a lot of these kids that are coming from the global south And we know basketball is very racialized as well, as we know many people that participate at the college and in the professional level, especially in the US, are black people. And even when we look at populations around the world where basketball is very prevalent, there's a lot of black people playing basketball. Even I in my classes I use this example all the time. I did it today. I was like, let's look at the top Canadian basketball players. How many top Canadian basketball players are black? How many are non-black?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And we pulled up the list, and it's like literally 80, 90% of the top rated basketball players in Canada are black. But 4% of the entire Canadian population is black. So how do we have this over representation? When we jump over to France and we look at the draft picks in the NBA from
Mm-hmm.
France this year, how many of those young people that were drafted to the NBA from France are of visible African descent?
Mm.
The majority, if I'm not mistaken, all five of them were, right? And we don't even know how many black people live in France because France doesn't take those racial statistics. We know it's a lot. Well, we know it's a lot in comparison to other European countries, but we know that they're not the majority of the population. And so people that are racialized as black face different challenges when going to apply for visas. Either you are maybe from a majority black nation, like a Nigeria, like a South Sudan, that just has a inherently harder time and you're vetted more rigorously than somebody from England per se that is coming to the United States. Or you can live like in the what I write about in the book specifically, you can be in a place like Panama that's a multiracial country where black people officially of last census are with 35% of the population, but we also live in the most marginalized parts of the country. When we talk about criminality, people believe us to be the most criminal aspects of the people of the population. We are the poorest. So even in a country that is multiracial, like your experience when you go to apply for a US visa can be very informed by your racialized experience at home. The example I give from the book is when the person, his parents, they go to the embassy, the US embassy in Panama, the security guard who was black like them, and they've already had issues with getting visas. Like he never came to the US and had his visa approved the first time. Not once. Not ever was it approved on the first time. And the security guard tells his family, they do, if you all are watching, the security guard rubs his hand to the parents. And he tells him, aquí es lo que manda aquí. Esto es lo que manda aquí. And the translation is, this is what makes decisions here. This is, and he's rubbing his black skin as it relates to there and say, this is how decisions are made in this space based on if you're black or not black. That's largely how they understand the decisions to be made. And so the US has a long history specifically of systematically keeping black people out or limiting black migration to the United States. And then in a post, well, nothing is post, but in this also world too, we know many instances, sorry about that, there's still so many instances where it's harder for black people to get back in. And we've seen it specifically in basketball. It was a case out of Syracuse University where there were some black kids um, from, I can't remember which country they were going to. And I think he might have been a black Canadian. And he was talking about how hard it was for him to come to the US. He said, they don't even have to tell you why they're not letting you in. But he said, like me, I have a Muslim last name, and I feel like that prevents me from getting in or having the same access as somebody else would. And so race is a huge factor in this entire system, immigration system, because it makes a big difference. Now, some people might not believe that, but I believe that race makes a huge difference in whether one has a better chance or a less better chance of being successful in. And when you add what country you could be
Mm.
coming from, it can be a challenge.
No, I definitely 100% agree. And I think we're seeing, well, through the work of people like yourself, more folks call out race when speaking about international athletes in particular, because historically it's always been generalized to just all.
International.
But yeah, like you said, there is a difference. We're talking about trafficking, which is very, again, very real and still happening in this country and many countries across this world, to be honest. But centered on the U.S. right now and what happens in folks coming to the United States. But what have you seen either in your research and in conversation, some of the long-term consequences of those who have been caught up and experienced trafficking as it relates to pathways to the United States through sport.
Yeah, so directly speaking to the book, in the instance of this young person, a consequence for him was he was never able to complete his education. Until this very day, he's still without his education, and his life has moved on. But I think his life would have moved on very differently had he been able to stay in the U.S. as he intended to do and play basketball and have a college degree. Just from anecdotal, not anecdotal, from data we have in the United States when we talk about the financial gain, the financial potential that people have with a bachelor's degree versus who don't, we know like their lives just end up being can go diverge very differently. And so that might not seem a major consequence. However, for me, I see it as major consequence because he just didn't have a fair shot at obtaining that higher education, which could have put him in a position to gain more for his family because of what somebody else did to him. I mean, other in addition to that, we have other young people who have been experienced basketball trafficking in the U.S. who don't have lawful migratory statuses in the U.S. and are living as undocumented people in the country. Um, Especially in this moment, it's not an easy thing to do. And one thing that an immigration attorney told us when we were in this situation, which is important to note, even have said what I said, is some people make an intentional decision to migrate and live as a undocumented person or somebody without a lawful migratory status because that's what life has presented them to do and they're willing to do that, which is a far different circumstance from somebody who never has that intent to be in a space without a lawful migratory status and to have to be surprised to know that you have an unstable migratory status, potentially are unlawfully present, potentially have accrued unlawful status in the country and are on grounds for deportation, and you came here just to play basketball, but you didn't know this, and now you wake up and somebody tells you this one day is a huge consequence. And so then we have young people that have to barter with this idea of illegality. Like, do I stay in this place and continue chasing my dreams, given the circumstances that I've heard, or do I leave and just go back to home and try to live a life where I know I don't have to be unlawfully present, but it's also the place I don't know if I'll have the opportunities that I want. And so those are some major consequences that we've seen actually are the young people who just don't know that they are in the country unlawfully. And we don't know who they are because if they come to the US and they are supposed to be at one school, as we saw with the Evelyn Mack Academy, where she brought in 75 kids and she sold them to different schools around the country, their only official record in the US was at her school. And so and one, she's passed away. Two, her school doesn't exist. Three, they haven't recovered the majority of those kids that came in. So we don't know if they're in the U.S. We don't know what the state of their lives are. We just don't know. We don't know, and I think that's a huge consequence is that we have so many people that are entertaining us through sport, giving us everything we need, and we don't even know if they're doing it safely or if they have what they need or can they have what they need. And so those are some of the major consequences that I've seen.
Appreciate you sharing that. It's a unfortunate reality, but one that I think we all need to hear and confront ourselves with in order to get to a place where we can actually induce some level of reform sooner than later. I want to pivot a little bit and focusing on the book itself. I think it's important to note that yes, this book is a moment of celebration, but also an acknowledgement of more work that needs to be done and will get done. But you have been doing this work for a while. I know about 3 years ago, you actually had a TED Talk at Duke, and that TED Talk was entitled "We Need to Address Basketball Trafficking." And looking at my computer right now, to date, you have what 33,000 views, which is a lot, both relatively and literally a lot. And yet still, I asked earlier, like, why now, etc. But why write a book? Like, why was it important for you to write a book despite and alongside the number of views and the times you've had these conversations in class, right? I'm sure the number of times you've done speaking engagements at conferences, like why a book?
Yeah, that's a great question. So this touches a little bit on the academic piece, on the scholarly journey from PhD to what comes next. I had decided on writing a book because I'll never forget Dr. Leonard Moore walked into one of our meetings of mostly black graduate assistants at UT Austin, and he said, "Y'all writing all these articles that nobody can read.
Mm,
At least I can give my mama a copy of my book." That's what he said. I was like, he got something there. At least
mm,
you can give a copy of the book. Because he's like, y'all have to pay $100 to access those articles if you want anybody to see them.
mm-hmm,
I said, he has a point. And so at that moment, I knew I was writing a book. I knew whatever I was doing with my dissertation, it was going to be a book. It wasn't going to be no 3 article dissertation. It wasn't going to be none of
yeah.
that. It was going to be a book. And thankfully enough, my advisors bought into that idea early. Like they let me write my dissertation as the book, where all I had to do literally when I went to publish it with a press, as we discussed when I was doing my dissertation, I cut all out the literature review. That's why I laughed when you said you're going to redo your
Mm.
literature review. I'm like, that whole thing got cut. Like I literally just cut it and just I don't know where it's at now, somewhere in who knows in some
Yeah.
drive. Cut it, just cut it, and then I wrote my whole dissertation as a book because I knew I wanted it. And then I bought a book called Ethnography: How to Write an Ethnography That Everybody Can Read. Because I also knew I didn't want to write in an academic way where it wasn't accessible, and
Mm-hmm.
I knew I wasn't trained that way. So I bought that workbook, and I just wrote everything in a way that was accessible, that was narrative based, because I knew I wanted people to read the book. I don't want to do it for like any tenure promotion. I want people to read the book. I want it to be accessible. I want this story to be accessible. So my decision for the book was accessibility and accessibility for people to get to know the story. I wanted it to be something that we could, talking about speaking engagements, that I could walk into a Nike, walk into a FIBA, walk into anybody interested in sport. I could talk about the issue. I could do a workshop on how we can address trafficking. And then I can also say, if you want to learn a little bit more in detail, here's the book. It's accessible and you all can give it to whoever it is you need and we can do it that way. And so it was something I wanted to do because that's what I wanted, practicality. And I also knew that it would help um, go on the road and be able to talk about it because people hold books in high regard to say like, oh, here's a copy of my book. And so I wanted to do that, and I knew I could turn the book, which I'm doing right now. I could turn the book into a series of workshops to send out to different basketball academies around the world on how do you protect your athletes. Go talk to some of these sport organizations on how do you protect the athletes, and always have the book as a resource for them to continue to use for more learning after.
I love that, bro. I love that a lot. Let's dive into the book a little bit. Folks read these 200 pages, right? What are a couple things you want them to take away and leave with? I'm not just talking. Obviously, no one Tito's story. That's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Practically
Uh,
speaking.
what I want them to take away from is actually one Tito's story, because I want people to see how one person was impacted by this whole thing, how their whole life was impacted, to see the whole thing point out. So I want people to understand his story. I want people to understand his history of how do we even get to this point of time. And then also I want people to take away from the book the recommendations as well too. Is how does it happen? Because I go into detail of how this happens and how we can also address these things from happening. And so I want people to know his story. I want them to know the details of how his story. I also want folks to know how to address these issues that are coming up. Um, not just critique the system, but I wanted to offer some things that I think we can do to improve the system.
Absolutely. I'm not gonna ask you for those answers because people are gonna buy this book. But I got you. But what I will ask you is, I know everything is very intentional, both with writing, but also, book cover art. And looking at the cover of your book, that's wild, your book that you wrote. It's kind of dark with black background. It's kind of looks like if I'm assuming right correctly, and obviously correct me if I'm wrong, like maybe a car headlight shining onto a basketball court with two hoops. Javier Wallace in top, well, right above one hoop in orange, and then basketball trafficking, stolen black Panamanian dreams, top left in two different colors. Why did you design your book cover in this way?
This question. I did not design that book cover.
Mm.
The press designed the book cover.
Your reaction to how they designed this book cover. Let me ask you that.
I didn't like it.
It's honest. Why not?
Um, it just, I don't know. It just seemed a little too dark for me. Like
Mm.
everything you just described, it was like this person comes and they're just like lurking around the court looking for
Mm.
somebody to like drap up, grab and sequester like everything we talked about trafficking
Mm-hmm.
because it's not because basketball trafficking largely is not that like it's not somebody just lurking away to see who we can sequester and who we can move in the force and so I get I know what they were saying because I asked them quite extensively like why they would do this because they're like, oh, it just like it goes with the trafficking piece, and I get it. It might resonate with certain people, but for me, the issue that I have with it is what I mentioned about it just still conjures up that same stereotypical notion of trafficking that
Yep.
I feel like we have to challenge because it plays into the idea that trafficking is only this one thing, and when in fact it's not. Like, I say this, my first talk ever about basketball trafficking at Black Student Athlete Summit was, and I wrote this today. It was, we came with smiles on our faces. It was
Mm.
America. What could go wrong? That's
Mm.
what a student was reported to have said when thinking about that. And so they didn't come here thinking like anything bad was going to happen. They weren't robbed. Like I said, they didn't come here with the intent to be here unlawfully. Right, things happen along the way, and I want people just to understand the complexity of trafficking. That it's not just this one thing. It's not these evil people only lurking in the corner waiting to take advantage of somebody. Like it's something that can happen to any person who wants to take advantage of an opportunity that's before them and they're willing to do it and they might not know all the ins and out of what they're getting into but they are hustling to do it but when they look up at what's going on around them the situation just isn't great but it's maybe not what the cover might inherently suggest.
That's honest. Let me ask you a different question alongside that. When you told, whenever you communicated to Tito that you were writing this book, and then the book, going through that process, what what were those conversations like as you were writing the book, knowing that, that Tito was aware of said book coming out? Like, what can you share about that, that timeline, if you will?
Yeah, of course. So, having gone through the PhD program, we had to do IRB. And
Mm-hmm.
so I had an IRB, and I just have to be very mindful of what information would be shared. And more than the IRB, to comply with him and his person, a lot of the book uses pseudonyms
Good. Yeah.
because that's that's not what he wanted for everybody to know, his business. And like most of there's a lot of pseudonyms in the book where he went, when he left Panama as a pseudonym, the name of the coaches, the name of his fans, his players are all pseudonyms. My name is real in there because I can't, because it's written almost in first person, so I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
anonymize myself. My dad's name is in there as it stands because people would know who my dad is. Um, the real, like other real cases that are reported in the news, that have been reported in the news, and I pulled from them sources, all of those are real names in there because all of those you can find in
Mm-hmm.
readily searches. But for him, because as I mentioned, he did, and that's one of the reasons why he went home and tried to come back to the U.S. the right way, is because he never intended to come to the U.S. as a potentially undocumented,
Mm.
unlawfully present person.
Yep.
Never. And so this, as the lawyer told us, because it was hard for me to like process all that was happening to him. And the lawyer, the pro bono immigration lawyer had to tell me when I was thinking of how to best help him. She said, it sucks, but this is what it is.
Mm,
This is what it is.
mm-hmm.
We can get into the hypotheticals as much as we want, but
Mm-hmm.
this is what it is. This
Mm-hmm.
is what it is. And so when I had to deal with what it is, I'm like, this is what it is, and it's his decision to make. I just always wanted to center his family in that decision that they made, to not want to go public, because a tactic that one can use, and we've seen it be used to successfully argue against the people who do the bad actors who take advantage of kids, is to go extremely public, is to talk about these things in the news, to go on TV. On the Vice documentary that I'm in, it's like that young guy Suleiman from Ivory Coast. He was willing to get on a documentary with Vice TV and talk about his very personal situation,
Mm-hmm.
and get into the details of even how he might have felt like he'd been duped or his family had been taken advantage of. But Tito and his family, they didn't want that. Like, he's just I don't want news
Mm-hmm.
cameras in my face. Like, I just want to go home.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to go home. I just
Mm.
want to go home and try my life again. I just want to go home.
That's honest. That's honest. Segment three, bro. I mean, you've written a book, you authored a book. And so my question to you is, how can I, the Walk with TFB community, best support you through this process?
Great question. So best support definitely looks like what we're doing now. You allowing me to come on your platform and speak to the individuals in on your platform that are interested, to educate them, number one, and then the promotion of the book, and then also not just the promotion of the book, but if you are ever, or any of the people that are listening to this are ever in a situation where they feel like they are seeing trafficking happen, or they want to educate people on the potentials of, or how to keep international athletes safe that are migrating to the US at the high school level or college level, is just to give me a ring and let me share those resources with y'all. Like, let us come do a workshop for your company, for your people, for your team, for your club, for your parents. Like, let us come, or let me rather. I don't have us yet, but I'm gonna say us. Let us
Oh.
come. I should say that. Let us come
There
and,
you
and,
go.
and help work with the team, and share more. Because the idea is to continue to sharing and see how we can mitigate some of these things from happening.
That's dope. How can people get in contact with you?
Yes, yes, you all can get in contact with y'all can get in contact with me at javierwallace.com, JAVIERWALLACE. If you get on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram, Javier Wallace 512. If you come to my website, that will link you through all of my channels. But if you just Google Javier Wallace, my website will come up, Instagram and LinkedIn. And shoot me an email, shoot me a message, and we can go from there.
Excellent. Last question before we close out here, bro. You've done a lot in the last, several years. I mean, your whole life, honestly, right? And I know this book is a moment, again, one of many moments that will continue to come. As you look to November 11th and the public release of the book officially, what are you most proud of?
Wow. I'm most proud of having written the book, and I'm proud that it's out. And not just a pure intrinsic sense of accomplishment that it's out, which I do congratulate myself on that, because it wasn't easy to do. But I'm proud that it's out because it has pushed me to help with the ultimate goal, is just to help anybody or anybody's that were in the situation that we were in back in 2017 throughout 2018, to provide the resources where they won't have to do everything you read in the book just to figure out how to move forward. So I'm glad I wrote the book and was able to detail those things, but I'm even more proud that I will have the opportunity to be positively impactful in the lives of other young people who might be experiencing these things.
I love that, bro. Well, I'm thankful that you jumped on our show for sure. You definitely have provided insight and perspective that is new, both to this podcast community, but also to myself as an entrepreneur, educator, and scholar. Definitely need to get you on here probably more frequently as we look to 2026 and beyond. Because someone who studies internationalization and international athlete development, this is not going nowhere, number one. And reform is needed, and conversations can definitely help lead to action. But I think doing it in the community is super dope. But most importantly, I think anyone and everyone who listens to this podcast episode, either on YouTube and or Spotify podcasts or Apple podcasts, who gives a damn about athletes, let alone humans, would hope would take some action step, whether it be buying the book, connecting with you, or something different or something else, to help us see reform sooner than later. So thank you for being who you are and doing this work.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for the work that you're doing on the platform. I just want to encourage you to continue doing the work. The road isn't easy.
Mm-mm.
Being a scholar, being an entrepreneur and a scholar at the same time, and bumping our heads against the barriers that persist and ideologies and just
Mm-hmm.
people who just don't understand. But I feel if you understand what it is you're doing, even if you can't articulate it, just keep striking the rock because something has to happen because you're doing it consistently. And so I appreciate the work that you're doing. I appreciate the way that you're showing up. Even if if it feels challenging, I would encourage you to continue doing it because the impact is being felt. One person at a time, one institution at a time. So just don't stop, man. Just don't stop. So thank you for what you're doing.
I'll receive it, Doc. I'll receive it, my brother. For everyone else, thank y'all for tuning in to another episode of Walk with TFB. Y'all heard Dr. Javier, man. Buy the book, connect with him, bring him in for workshops, because this got to get done, and we will get it done.
One,
Look forward to future
one.
conversations as we look to the end of the year, but also 2026. But as always, until then, we walking. Peace.